Hey Reddit, I don't even know where to start with this, but here I am. My name is Jeff, I'm 38, and until recently, I thought my wife's Sarah, 35, and I had a pretty good marriage. We've been together for 10 years, married for 7, and we've got a 5-year-old daughter, Emma. Things between us weren't always perfect, but we had a solid foundation, or so I thought. Lately, though, Sarah's behavior has been off. She's become distant, snappier than usual, and keeps her phone practically glued to her hand. The little things I used to overlook, like her staying out late with friends or suddenly taking up a yoga class, started piling up. A few weeks ago, I brushed off my suspicions. Sarah said she was stressed about work, and I wanted to believe her. But then, she came home one night smelling like men's cologne, not mine, and that nagging feeling in my gut turned into something I couldn't ignore anymore. It all came to a head last week. Sarah left for her yoga class, but she forgot to turn off her laptop at home. Normally, I wouldn't pry, but the screen lit up with a notification while I was tidying up, and curiosity got the best of me. It was a Facebook Messenger chat with someone named Mike. The conversation was graphic. They weren't talking about yoga. Instead, there were details about meeting up at a hotel and things they'd done that made my stomach turn. I sat there, stunned, as message after message popped up. My hands were shaking. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. But when I scrolled back, there it was in black and white, plans for another rendezvous, and Sarah calling him babe. I thought about calling her immediately, but I knew I needed more than a confrontation fueled by raw emotion. I screenshotted everything and sent it to my phone. I also checked the Find My iPhone app. Sure enough, Sarah wasn't at her yoga studio. She was at a hotel across town. I couldn't breathe. My head spun as I tried to figure out what to do. Do I storm in? Call her out? Or sit here and let the betrayal sink in? I couldn't just sit at home knowing where she was and what she was doing. So, I got in my car and drove to the hotel. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad movie. My mind raced with thoughts of what I'd say, or if I'd say anything at all. When I got there, I parked and waited, not sure what I was even looking for. A few minutes later, the entrance doors opened, and out walked Sarah. She wasn't alone. She was laughing and holding hands with a guy who must have been Mike. He was taller than me, good-looking in a douchey sort of way, and clearly smug about the whole situation. They didn't even try to act discreet. Sarah leaned into him, and they kissed right there in the parking lot before walking to his car. I snapped a picture with my phone. It was like I needed proof to convince myself this wasn't some horrible dream. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. I didn't confront her then. Maybe I was a coward, or maybe I knew I'd say something I couldn't take back. Instead, I drove home, angrier with each passing mile. When she came home a couple of hours later, I was waiting for her in the living room. "Did you have fun at yoga?" I asked, my voice as calm as I could manage. She froze, and for a second, I saw the panic in her eyes. But Sarah being Sarah, she quickly recovered. "Yeah, it was fine." "Why?" "I know you weren't at yoga, Sarah. I know you were at the hotel with Mike. Want to try again?" Her face paled. For a moment, I thought she might come clean, but instead, she doubled down. "What are you talking about? You're being paranoid again." I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots and the picture of her with Mike. "Explain this." That's when the real Sarah came out. She didn't apologize or try to salvage anything. Instead, she went on the attack. "Why are you going through my stuff? That's private!" she shouted, completely ignoring the fact that she'd been caught red-handed. Her defense was all deflection and gaslighting. She claimed I'd been neglecting her, that she felt unappreciated, and Mike was just a friend. But the evidence was damning, and she knew it. After her initial outburst, Sarah tried to turn on the waterworks, claiming she'd made a mistake, and begging me to forgive her. But the damage was done. I couldn't even look at her without feeling sick. I went upstairs, locked myself in the guest room, and tried to process everything. The emotions came in waves: anger, sadness, humiliation. How could she do this to me? To Emma? To the life we'd built together? I kept replaying the scene at the hotel in my head, and each time, it hurt worse. I wanted to scream, punch something, or cry, but mostly I just felt empty. The woman I loved, the mother of my child, had betrayed me in the worst way. That night I barely slept. Sarah tried knocking on the door, pleading for me to come out and talk, but I couldn't face her. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering what I'd done to deserve this. By morning I knew one thing: there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache and a sense of dread about what needed to happen next. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table when I came downstairs, looking like she hadn't slept either. She opened her mouth to say something, but I held up my hand to stop her. "We're done," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "You can lie to yourself all you want, but I'm not going to live like this. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She burst into tears, but they felt more manipulative than genuine. "Jeff, please, it didn't mean anything. I'll end it with him, I promise. Let's go to counseling, anything you want. Just don't throw us away." "Us? You already threw us away, Sarah," I snapped. "You didn't think about us when you were sneaking off to hotels or texting Mike while sitting next to me on the couch. You don't get to play the victim now." Her tears turned to anger. "Oh, so you're perfect? Like you've never made mistakes in this marriage? Maybe if you'd been more attentive, I wouldn't have needed someone else." That hit me like a slap in the face, but I kept my composure. "Blame me all you want, but this isn't about my shortcomings. This is about your choices. And I'm not sticking around to be your backup plan." I told her I wanted a separation and that I'd be contacting a lawyer. She looked shocked, like she hadn't expected me to take such a firm stance. But honestly, what else could I do? Over the next few days, I started putting things in motion. I reached out to a divorce attorney and explained the situation. She told me that since I had evidence of Sarah's infidelity, it could play a role in how the divorce proceedings went, especially when it came to custody and division of assets. I also made arrangements to stay with my brother temporarily. The thought of living under the same roof as Sarah was unbearable. I packed a bag and told Emma that Daddy was going on a little trip for work. She was too young to understand, and I hated lying to her, but I wasn't ready to explain the situation yet. Sarah alternated between begging me to stay and lashing out, calling me every name in the book. She tried to guilt-trip me about Emma, saying I was abandoning our family. But I stood my ground. The night before I moved out, I overheard her on the phone with someone, I'm guessing Mike, complaining about how unreasonable I was being. Hearing her voice dripping with venom only solidified my decision. Leaving wasn't easy. As much as I wanted to hate her, part of me still loved the woman I thought she was. But staying would have been worse. I deserved better. Now, as I sit here in my brother's guest room, I feel a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for what I've lost, anger at Sarah's betrayal, and hope for a fresh start. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you can't control what someone else does, but you can control how you respond to it. For anyone reading this and going through something similar, my advice is simple: know your worth. Don't let someone else's choices define your happiness. The first week after moving out was the hardest. Even though I was the one who left, I felt like I'd lost everything. My routine was completely upended. No more coming home to Emma's hugs, no more family dinners, no more semblance of the life I thought I had. I threw myself into work, hoping it would distract me. It helped, but only a little. Every quiet moment was filled with questions I couldn't stop asking. How did it get to this point? What could I have done differently? Was there something wrong with me? Talking to people helped. My brother, Mark, was a rock, always ready to listen without judgment. And then there were my parents, who hadn't been huge fans of Sarah to begin with. My mom called every day to check on me, and while her "I told you so" vibes were a little grating, I knew she meant well. But the most unexpected support came from an old friend, Amy. We'd gone to college together and hadn't talked in years, but she reached out after hearing about the split through mutual friends. She didn't pry or push, she just reminded me that I wasn't alone. One night, after a long conversation with Amy, I realized something. I wasn't just mourning Sarah's betrayal. I was mourning the life I thought we had. And while it hurt, I couldn't let that pain define me. I started seeing a therapist, which was one of the best decisions I've ever made. She helped me unpack the emotional baggage I'd been carrying, not just from the infidelity, but from years of putting my needs second to keep the peace in my marriage. As much as I wanted to focus on healing, there was one thing I couldn't avoid: figuring out custody arrangements for Emma. I was terrified Sarah would try to weaponize our daughter against me, and in some ways she did. When we first sat down with our lawyers, Sarah painted a picture of me as an absent father who cared more about work than family. It was a complete exaggeration, but I knew she was desperate to keep primary custody. Thankfully, my lawyer was sharp. She presented evidence of Sarah's infidelity, including the screenshots and the hotel photos, to counter Sarah's narrative. While it wasn't directly relevant to custody, it damaged Sarah's credibility and put me in a stronger position. The real turning point came when I insisted on a co-parenting agreement. I didn't want to punish Sarah by taking Emma away from her, no matter how much I resented her. My focus was on what was best for our daughter. Sarah, however, fought tooth and nail to limit my time with Emma. It was ugly: accusations, tears, and even a moment where she claimed I wasn't emotionally stable enough to parent. But through it all, I kept my cool and leaned on my lawyer's advice. In the end, we settled on joint custody. I'd have Emma every other week, and we'd split holidays evenly. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in months, I had clarity. My life was different now, messier, more complicated, but it was still mine. The first few weeks of co-parenting were weird. Dropping Emma off at Sarah's house and walking away felt like ripping off a Band-Aid every time. I'd drive back to my place and sit in the silence, unsure of what to do with myself. When Emma was with me, I threw everything into being the best dad I could. We baked cookies, built pillow forts, and watched her favorite cartoons on repeat. But there were moments when she'd ask, "Why can't you and Mommy live together anymore?" And my heart would shatter all over again. I kept my answers simple and honest. "Sometimes grown-ups can't stay married, but we both love you very much." That seemed to satisfy her for now, but I dreaded the days she'd ask for more details. As for Sarah, things remained tense. She tried to play nice in front of Emma, but behind closed doors, she was bitter and petty. She'd accidentally schedule activities during my weeks or make snide remarks about my parenting. It was infuriating, but I refused to let her drag me into a fight. Instead, I focused on creating a new normal. I joined a local support group for divorced dads, which turned out to be a lifesaver. Hearing their stories made me feel less alone, and their advice was invaluable. Bit by bit, I started to reclaim my life. I redecorated my apartment, picked up some new hobbies, and even went out with friends for the first time in ages. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not just going through the motions. One Saturday, while Emma was with Sarah, I decided to try something I hadn't done in years: go for a hike. I packed a small bag, laced up my boots, and headed to a nearby trail. Halfway up, I ran into Amy. She was there with her dog, a hyperactive golden retriever named Max. We laughed about the coincidence, and ended up walking the rest of the trail together. Amy and I started spending more time together after that. She wasn't just a friend from my past, she was a reminder that good people still existed, even after everything I'd been through. I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't ready for a relationship, and Amy respected that. But she became a constant in my life, someone I could talk to without judgment. Over time, what started as friendship began to grow into something more. One evening, as we sat on my couch watching a terrible action movie, I realized I was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in months. I hadn't just survived the worst chapter of my life. I was starting to thrive. Looking back, I wouldn't wish what happened with Sarah on anyone. But I learned something important. You can't control what others do, but you can choose how to rebuild after they've torn you down. To anyone going through the same thing, here's my advice: don't let the pain define you. Use it as fuel to create a life that's truly yours. As the months went by, I settled into my new life. Emma was thriving under the co-parenting arrangement. She loved having 2 rooms to decorate, and seemed genuinely happy. That made all the difference for me. Sarah and I still had our tense moments, but we'd reached a truce of sorts. I stopped expecting her to acknowledge the damage she'd done, and she seemed to realize that I wasn't going to let her guilt trip me anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was manageable. I kept busy with work, hobbies, and spending time with Emma. My brother, Mark, convinced me to join a local softball league, which turned out to be a surprisingly good outlet. The camaraderie helped me feel connected again, and it was a great distraction from the mess of emotions I still had to sort through. Amy and I stayed close, but we were taking things slow. She was supportive, funny, and easy to talk to, a stark contrast to the drama I'd lived with for years. While I wasn't ready to label anything yet, being around her reminded me what it felt like to trust someone. But not everything was smooth sailing. Every now and then, I'd hit an emotional low. A song on the radio or a fleeting memory of Sarah and I in happier times would knock the wind out of me. Grief doesn't follow a timeline, and I had to learn to let those feelings come and go without letting them consume me. Just as I felt like I was finding my footing, Sarah threw a curveball my way. One afternoon, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked different. Nervous. "We need to talk," she said. I let her in, more out of curiosity than anything else. She sat on the couch, wringing her hands, before blurting out, "I ended things with Mike." For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. "Okay?" I finally said, unsure where she was going with this. "I made a mistake, Jeff," she continued. "I thought what I had with him was real, but it wasn't. He used me, and I was too blind to see it. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I want us to try again." I blinked, stunned. Of all the things she could have said, that was the last thing I expected. "Sarah," I said slowly, "you blew up our marriage. You lied, cheated, and humiliated me. Do you honestly think we can just go back to the way things were?" She started crying, but I felt nothing. The Sarah sitting in front of me wasn't the woman I'd married. That woman was gone. "I just thought," she trailed off. "Well, you thought wrong," I said firmly. "I'm not interested in getting back together. I've moved on, and so should you." She left shortly after, looking defeated. Part of me felt bad for her, but I knew I'd made the right decision. That door was closed, and there was no going back. For the first time, I felt truly free. Free from her lies, her manipulation, and the weight of trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. After Sarah's unexpected visit, I was left with a strange mix of emotions: relief, anger, and even a little sadness. While I had no intention of reconciling, her admission forced me to confront a truth I'd been avoiding: she was human. Flawed, selfish, and broken in ways I couldn't fix. For years, I'd put her on a pedestal. I told myself she was better than her worst moments, but now I realized she was simply someone who made terrible choices. And for the first time, I felt a sense of closure. I didn't tell Amy about Sarah's visit right away. It wasn't that I was hiding it, I just needed time to process it myself. When I finally brought it up, Amy smiled knowingly. "She only came back because she knows you're moving on," Amy said. "It's hard for some people to let go, especially when they realize they've lost something good." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been something good, and Sarah's betrayal didn't take that away. That weekend, Amy invited me to a family barbecue at her parents' house. Meeting her family felt like a big step, and I was nervous. But they were warm and welcoming, and by the end of the day, I realized something: I was happy. Genuinely, undeniably happy. While I was rebuilding my life, I knew the most important piece was Emma. She was my anchor through all the chaos, and I wanted to make sure she felt secure. One evening, as I was tucking her into bed, she asked, "Daddy, are you and Mommy friends now?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because Mommy said she misses you," Emma said, her little face so earnest it broke my heart. I took a deep breath. "Mommy and I will always care about each other because we both love you very much. But sometimes, grown-ups aren't meant to stay together. And that's okay." She nodded, her big eyes searching mine for reassurance. Okay, Daddy. After that conversation, I made a conscious effort to keep things civil with Sarah, at least in front of Emma. I wasn't doing it for Sarah, I was doing it for my daughter, to show her that love and respect didn't have to disappear just because a marriage ended. It wasn't easy. There were times when Sarah pushed my buttons, especially when it came to scheduling or decision-making. But I reminded myself that holding on to anger would only hurt Emma in the long run. The more I focused on Emma, the more I saw how resilient she was. Kids have a way of adapting, of finding joy even in the toughest circumstances. She loved her time with me, and I made every effort to give her the stability and love she deserved. And in doing so, I found something unexpected, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. It's been over a year now since my life was turned upside down. Looking back, I can't believe how much has changed, and how much stronger I've become because of it. Emma is thriving. She's adjusted well to the co-parenting arrangement, and her laughter fills my home during our weeks together. She's the brightest part of my life, and everything I do is for her. Sarah and I have settled into a cordial relationship. While I wouldn't call us friends, we've learned how to communicate effectively for Emma's sake. It took time, but I've let go of the bitterness. Carrying that weight only held me back from moving forward. As for Amy, she's become a constant presence in my life. What started as a rekindled friendship has grown into something deeper. She understands my hesitation to rush things, and we're taking it one day at a time. For the first time in years, I feel like I can trust someone completely. Most importantly, I've rediscovered myself. I've learned that my worth isn't tied to someone else's choices, and that life doesn't end when a relationship does. I've built a new life, one filled with purpose, laughter, and hope. If there's one piece of advice I'd give to anyone going through what I went through, it's this: you are stronger than you think. It might not feel like it now, but the pain will fade, and you will find joy again. Trust yourself, take it one step at a time, and don't be afraid to let go of what's holding you back. For me, the darkest chapter of my life led to a brighter future than I ever could have imagined. And for that I'm grateful. Thank you, Reddit, for giving me a space to share my story. I hope it helps someone out there who feels as lost as I once did. Stay strong. You've got this.